Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the most listened to podcast in heaven and the most hated podcast of the undead. For the first time ever, we have a listener reaching out for advice on vampires, but we're going to hold that for a little bit later. All right, here's the three things we have for today, Laura. We're going to do Neurolink, the stated purpose, progress, and problems that we see with it. And challenge Catholics to start thinking about this stuff. SpaceX, the stated purpose, progress, and problems. Listener advice related to vampires. And finally, Harrison Butker and Francis Arinze. Who did it better? A place kicker for the Chiefs or the Catholic Cardinal? All right. How are you doing, Laura Human?
I'm doing good, Clark Massey.
All right. Shall we just get right to it?
Sure.
Okay, you may not be paying attention, but Elon Musk has founded a company called Neuralink. And what he says is the purpose has to do with AI. Artificial intelligence has a couple problems. It can become anti-human or biased and end up hurting humans. It doesn't even have to be that advanced to be harmful. Like if you just have like a little nail making factory that thinks making nails is the highest purpose, it might make the whole world into nails, if it can figure out how to do that. The AI problem that we've addressed this before, but just to refresh everyone, there's this idea of the singularity moment where AI gets to the point that it can build better AI and then it escapes humans, because it starts iterating itself. Amongst the AI researchers, transhumanism is a real problem. Even extinctionist ideas in different forms are floating around.
People aren't necessarily against it. And it's not just a fear of transhumanism or extinction, but some embracing of it.
Right. And Musk is warning this, meaning like he's saying, I've seen this. I've met people who believe this way. You should be concerned. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we've all seen, we've all met people who the way they're speaking appears to say that humans are almost like a blight on the planet. That would be kind of an extinctionist sentiment.
Yes.
And Musk is also worried that any bias in the AI, like critical race theory, will be embedded into the AI, and that bias will end up hurting people because that is not actually truth. So although Musk's idea is that AI will most likely be positive, the negative possibilities of AI are so enormous that you need to be more careful, and we need to be, on guard against this. So Neuralink is a project to help people keep up with AI. So the idea is that the brain is actually an amazing thing, but the two problems with the brain are input and output. And the number one problem is actually output. So what I think this means is like if we look at a photo, think of all the information just by looking at a photo for a few seconds you can receive, all the colors, all the shapes, all the, implied things in the photo. And now that's an input issue. Now try to explain the photo, either redraw it or put it into words or whatever. Your output's going to be way slower than your input. So output actually might be 1,000 times slower than input. But both
and incomplete comparatively, probably. Like you could take in a lot more about a person's emotions from the facial expression than they're making than you could explain their emotions.
Sure. Right. So although this mind is amazing, the kind of like there's like a keyboard and he's thinking of the mind almost like it's a computer. So it's almost like there's a keyboard and a monitor. And the monitor is not very good on our mind, like the output device, So the idea is to embed a computer chip in people's brains. And he says we're already kind of doing this because you're already staring at your phone all the time. The idea is just to shorten that.
I think he kind of famously said, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago or longer, people were worried about his sort of interest in enhancing the human mind with AI. And he said, well, you're already a cyborg because you've got this extension to your body that's in your hand.
Right. So he's just going to take it from your hand to put it on top of your head and weave it in. All right. And this sounds like sci-fi, but we're going to talk about how much progress he's actually made on this. So the idea there is that it would help with input and output, right? It could, help with speed learning. It could help you somehow do something outside your body to give away information more quickly, communicate better. And ultimately, this could dramatically increase human productivity. And his idea is that it won't be the rich that end up with this device. If this device makes you so much more productive, basically you'll take a financing mortgage out to get one of these things, and it'll be able to pay for it because it's making you so much more productive. All right. Then when he gets even weirder is the model of the brain that he's been suggesting to everyone is that there's a cortex and a limbic system. Okay. So the cortex is by his explanation, I don't have any idea if a neurologist would agree with this. The cortex is higher level thinking, it's reason, it's all this. And the limbic system is eat, sleep, sex, all the base desires, right? And essentially, the cortex spends the majority of its time trying to keep the limbic system happy. And he suggested, how much more productive would we be if occasionally you turned off your limbic system? If you took a teenage boy in math class and turned off the limbic system and let him learn math that way, could that be actually a positive? So that's what he's kind of playing around with. All right. What has he done? Well, he says the first step to get to this goal would be to help severely handicapped people, to help them interact in virtual space better, and then the next step would be to help paralyzed people regain movement in their limbs. The third step would be helping blind people essentially have vision, somehow stimulating the brain either based on what the eye, somehow, I don't know how he's going to do that, but that's the next step. And then the fourth step would be kind of this greater vision that maybe able-bodied people would have this Neurolink chip in their head. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense so far?
Mm-hmm. I'm here with you. Mm-hmm.
You're here with me. Okay, good. All right. So far, he has gotten FDA approval for a human trial, and they've done a human trial. Mm-hmm. A robot surgeon implanted this chip into someone's skull and essentially put a few more than 60 some threads, into the skull that are smaller than a human hair, injected them into the skull. And each thread has 16 sensors on it. So that creates, 16 times 60, 1,000 plus possible readings on this, The guy they did it to had been paralyzed for 8 years and was a quadriplegic. The goal of this was to show that it was safe and that it was somewhat useful for the first implant. And the hardware is actually designed to be removable and upgradable. And their goal is to, although they've done this with one guy, their goal is to do about 10 more this year or 10 more in the next year. All right. So this guy has this chip and he's been giving interviews. What he's shown that he can, he had been using computers using a mouth stick, to move the cursor on the screen and to type. And now he is able to, with his mind, move the cursor very quickly. Not with his eyes, it's not tracking his eyes. It's actually with his mind. He's able to use his cursor. He also has this app where he's starting to map out hey, I'm trying to move my index finger, and it'll show what part of the brain highlights in order to try to move the index finger, right? And then the idea is that somehow that would later become something where he could actually move that index finger by stimulating the Neuralink. All right. And that's where we're at. What do you think, Laura Heeman? Commentary.
There's a lot there. I think one thing that's interesting is is Elon Musk most famous for Tesla or SpaceX or for being a troll? And I think it's kind of interesting. He is a big time troll, but is surprisingly very pro-human. And I think that's an interesting thing about him. I don't know that he deeply understands, what it means to be human and what a good life is. And so that's interesting. And I think with all of these, we have like a problem in science that it is not like within the field of science to answer the question, like, just because we can do this, should we do this? Like, that's not a built-in question to developing the technology.
What frustrates me is that Catholics are often backwards looking on this stuff, right? Like someone, starts stem cell research and then we want to comment on it. And then even after it's kind of resolved, we'll still comment on it, and this is going to happen. This Neuralink's like well on its way, right?
Yeah, I think there's like a problem related to that, is that this is happening without, well, in this case, this is getting FDA approval. But Elon Musk has incredible resources and is going to develop stuff without the input of the rest of society, because he can. He doesn't need the government to approve it. Like,
not just him. Everyone.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Like social media happened not because we weighed the cost-benefit analysis. It just happens, right? And my problem is that, like, we as Catholic, like, theological types will start writing our dissertations on this thing after it's already happened.
Well, and the thing I write, and I think we tend to think there's this, like some of us, like myself included, are kind of more Luddites, and we think the old way is better, and this is happening, right? So we can't go back to the old way. I think another issue is that we want to spend a lot of time thinking about it and talking about it, and how does like our sort of Catholic ethics impact wider society, and does it, are we doing a lot of philosophy and theology that doesn't have an impact on these sorts of things?
That's my hypothesis. My hypothesis, the only Catholic I see really engaging the future and in real time is like Bishop Barron. Like when Jordan Peterson comes on the scene and is taking kind of this interesting psychological take on the Bible that's selling out movie theaters, Bishop Barron is there to comment on it. But I don't see that should be cutting edge, like theological discussion right there, or scripture study. That should be the front of the field right there. Accidentally, Jordan Peterson might come up with it, but we should all be like figuring out where that fits, But I think we're not comfortable doing that until it's 10 years old, right? It's kind of like, I'm overstating this, but like, it's like Stephen King, like nobody in the 90s was going to write their PhD dissertation in literature on Stephen King, but they should have been. Because like he's pretty relevant, but like, but it was like too like new. It was too like, it was almost shameful to like think about it that way. Right. The way we as Catholics, if we're going to have any say in any of this, is by thinking about systems, and maybe even by writing sci-fi novels. Like the way we're going to find out how AI might play out is by reading sci-fi novels. And the other thing about this systems idea is like, oh, should we reel in AI? Well, guess what? We have no governmental way of reeling in AI because our government has two big problems. One, they never want to kill the golden goose because we need bailed out of a big debt problem we have. Mm-hmm. So if this is where economic growth is coming from, we're going to have it regardless of the bad side effects. Yeah. And two, if you do reel it in, does it just move somewhere else to China and then you have it anyway, but you didn't get to benefit from it, And same with this Neuralink stuff. Like this stuff is just going to happen. And there's not a clear way that we as Catholics or anybody can prevent it. But can we in any way help people cope or get ready or deal or reject or accept or whatever, or maybe say, like when Elon Musk is saying publicly, like AI needs to be truthful. That's the one rule I would give it. He's almost making like a moral argument. Yeah. And he's not a moral theologian, but it's like, can one of our moral theologians come up with like the 10 commandments of AI? That'd be good. You know, like something that like we think will help humanity more.
Maybe that is happening somewhere, but it's not. I know I don't feel like I've experienced that type of discussion.
When I go to young Catholics who want to get theology like graduate degrees, and if I told them, I've done this before, if I go, hey, go start a dissertation on like the 10 Commandments of AI, like that's what we need to be thinking about. I don't think they do that. You know, I just can't get anyone to like, I did that when Jordan Peterson was first. I said, you need to go write a PhD dissertation on this Jordan Peterson guy. And that still sounds stupid. Like he's such a pop culture figure, but he's more important than all the other, like, man, I'm being mean, but when I hear what people's dissertation topics are, I'm like, you could have a lot more effect in our society and culture. You just,
yeah, I mean, maybe that's not the point of a dissertation necessarily, but I
think it's what cutting edge research looks like.
Mm-hmm. There's also like this is coming and it's coming fast, and like how is it acceptable to get a Neuralink chip implanted, you know, in you if you are a Catholic, or you know, like I think that those types of thought experiments have to be happening now and not when everyone is doing it, you know, and I mean, there's only so much you can kind of guess ahead of time, I guess, but I don't know. But I
think
also,
a lot of the NFP theological logic could apply here.
I agree, yeah.
Like this idea of like wanting to divorce the limbic system. That's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, that's bad. You know? And the idea
so let's explain
that the purpose of the human person is to produce, you know, is not.
Sure. I think there's this like solid thing, like why not disconnect the limbic system? That is a very rich territory of thought. Like we could say a lot about that. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Or why too let a paralyzed man have this, but maybe not an able-bodied person?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like let's talk about that. You know, like that's relevant like today. You know, I mean, like that's already a relevant topic.
I think
right
it's kind of been interesting in like Olympics sometimes when people have like artificial limbs that make their knees amazing or something.
Right.
You know?
Blade Runner. Like Blade Runner, if
Yeah.
you can cut your legs off, you can be faster in the Olympics because we can basically make you a cyborg. Right?
Yeah.
But why not? You know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
and I also think like there is like the Catholic thought has a very coherent like view and understanding of man and what it means to be a man, and I think is there a way that this can be, you know, presented to wider culture is interesting to me. And I mean, I do think people have been doing that and trying to do that. And I think that's just like an ever new question in the face of developing technology, you know. I do. Another thing that's interesting though is that Elon Musk is worried about AI taking over. So he's going to plant AI in humans to make them competitive, but it's like, you know, we think of the, you know, the classic sci-fi thing is like robot versus man, but it's like robot within man versus man.
he's not
like
implanting AI.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
chips.
artificial. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's like cyborg
but if those
versus
chips
AI.
are right, will at some point the technology become like man versus cyborg, man within himself is my question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, there's also this idea of a danger here where pacemakers used to not be encrypted. I think they are now. But like then somebody made a little sci-fi episode of West Wing or something where somebody hacked somebody's pacemaker to kill them. You know, and then everybody's like, oh, I guess we should we should have like a password for your pacemaker, you know? And like once you have Neuralink, you know, the idea that you as a human could get hacked.
Or just the technology itself is trying to make you act in some other way.
Right,
you know?
hacked by AI.
Because we've talked, we've talked about, you know, the idea that AI, like if AI is told to make nails and then it makes nails out of the whole world, right? Well, if that's implanted in you and it's like, does it make you
So
Anyway.
if you're listening to the Simpleton
This
podcast
is very
right
sci-fi,
now,
yes.
well, it is, but it's like
It's
when
here.
you say,
Yeah.
if you say what the progress is at this point, you should have pause, right? And if you hear the Simpleton podcast and you think we're doing a poor job unpacking the problem right now, that's my point. Go work on this issue. CUA professors who listen to the Simpleton podcast and don't. Just go work on this issue. We need you working on this issue. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think if you are aware of anybody that is working on this issue and has really interesting ideas about it, please send it to us.
Great. Yeah. I think this deserves more than a podcast and more than a blog entry. You know what I mean? Like we need something more persuasive and more well thought out than that. But anyway, all right, let's move on to SpaceX. The other civilization disrupting thing Elon Musk is up to that's happening, whether or not you agree with it or not, and whether or not the government thinks it's a good idea or not. All right, here's the stated purpose of SpaceX. It starts with this idea that why don't we have aliens around here? Of all the people who believe in aliens, Elon Musk doesn't appear to be one. He doesn't believe we've been visited by aliens. And the problem there is that if the universe is like over 13 billion years old, even at sublight speed, a spacefaring civilization from another planet should have maybe sent stuff here or been here, but we have no evidence, you know? And our civilization, if you date it back to writing, is only a few thousand years old. And it could be that either there is not another civilization or consciousness in the world on these other planets, according to Elon, or it just always is a single planet civilization, you know? And our civilization has already invented ways to destroy itself. You know, maybe AI, but definitely like nuclear weapons, and we should maybe do it with pollution, you know? So there's these like civilization threats that come along with civilization. So it could be that there are no like spacefaring species because they all like, you know, extinct themselves due to like technology they develop, you know? So Musk's idea is that we need to become a multi-planetary species, and we need to get that multi-planet to actually be independent of Earth. That's his goal. That's his stated goal of SpaceX, is to create something on Mars that will actually be an independent colony of humanity to protect consciousness and civilization. So if we all nuke ourselves here, Mars can continue humanity. That's the idea. Sounds crazy, but here you go. It's becoming more real than you'd think. So here's where we're at with SpaceX. There's kind of two major players in the U.S. for actually launching stuff into space. One is the United Launch Alliance, and the other one is SpaceX. There's also this group founded by Bezos called Blue Origin that we need to talk about too. So the United Launch Alliance is kind of like sending up traditional rockets. It's kind of like your daddy's Oldsmobile. They can do everything, launch it, but they're just not cheap because they're not reusing the rockets. And they'll claim, well, SpaceX is charging about what we charge, but the point is that SpaceX is making a nice profit on what they're charging, and I don't think ULA is. They're innovating a little bit because I don't know if a little bit's the right word, but basically we were getting all our rocket engines from Russia, and now that we're in a proxy war with Russia, they're now sourcing them from the US and changing the design. Now, so they're a real rocket company. Now, Blue Origin has also sent some space tourists up, but they have not actually been really launching satellites and doing all the rocketry stuff. Now, Bezos says the point of Blue Origin, the purpose of Blue Origin, is to get heavy industry off Earth. Meaning like, what if like there's these asteroids going around that have all these heavy metals in them? What if we put a metal foundry on the asteroid? What if we powered it with nuclear power? Because who cares about radiation on the asteroid? And who cares about getting rid of nuclear waste? We just shoot it off into space. And we could mine all that metal and send it back to Earth.
And this is also the plot of the Jetsons movie from the 90s.
Well, they were harvesting other
They were
planets,
harvesting
right?
metal to make sprockets
Okay.
on another planet, and unknowingly destroying the home of the furry creatures, grungies, or some cute little alien guys. Mm.
Good. Yeah. I kind of like this idea. I don't want to make fun of it too bad. The big problem with space is getting stuff up there. Getting stuff down from there is a lot cheaper, you know? So the idea would be like, what if we made Earth like just an incredible like environmental preserve in a sense where humans live and it's just great, but we're taking all the dirty industry and putting it in space.
Well, the warning is in the Jetsons movie, so you be the judge.
Okay, so if the furries live on an asteroid or the moon, they're in trouble, you know, by Blue Origin. All right. SpaceX is doing this. They are the inventors of rocket recycling and reuse. All right. And they kind of have this down. They've landed rockets over 300 times. Most of the rockets they've done so far are kind of like their regular size rocket and their heavy rocket. They call one Falcon and the large one they call Falcon Heavy, right? And at current rates, SpaceX will be sending 90% of all the stuff that leaves our planet into orbit in 2024. That includes every nation on Earth. You know, China and all other carriers, including ULA, will make up the remaining 10% of mass sent into space. So SpaceX
So a private company... Sorry, say that. Go ahead.
So SpaceX is basically dominating the rocket industry right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Falcon Heavy takes twice the payload of weight that a regular Falcon rocket would take. And the Starship rocket that they're working on that they don't have down yet will take 4 times the payload of Falcon Heavy. All right. Mm-hmm. So the payload of Starship will be about 200 tons. And they believe that this Starship rocket will even be cheaper to launch than a traditional throwaway rocket that's of small size, right? So the other accomplishments of SpaceX right now is they've taken 50 people to orbit with no deaths, which is quite an accomplishment. They are creating the Starlink internet system satellites. These satellites are communicating via lasers, basically sending information over by using laser transmissions, you know? And the goal, and what they claim is this whole Mars goal, the goal is to not have NASA pay for it, but to have the Starlink internet system and have this like satellite for hire system where they're like charging people to send their stuff into orbit, that will pay for the Mars colony. And this is a completely private company. It's not publicly traded. You can't buy a share in it. And so we don't have any of their like books to see how profitable they are. They don't have to publish that. And they believe that right now, that in 20 years, they could have a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. All right. And they're right now running their factories day and night to make the stuff to create these starships to do this. Okay, so what is this going to look like in the next 20 years? Like, what are they trying to pull off? They're going to basically wait until the Earth and Mars are as close together as they can in their natural orbits, and they're going to be launching as much as they can into space to kind of create these like space armadas. So basically, they'll have a bunch of spaceships sitting in space, waiting to go to Mars until the like Mars Earth window is like properly close. And they're going to have to, for every like one ship they send up to go to Mars, they're going to have 5 launches just to get, you know, gasoline up there or whatever the rocket fuel is to refuel that ship to get to Mars. So there's going to be like 5 launches for every one ship that goes to Mars, or 6 launches for every one ship that goes to Mars. And then every 2 years, the window opens and this armada will leave our, orbit and start making its way to Mars. The first so many armadas will be one-way trips because the value of the spaceship itself to tear it down and reuse it on Mars will be greater than bringing it back. So they'll cannibalize these ships. The first colonists that go to Mars may never come back, but eventually they're going to have 2-way rockets to and from Mars is the goal. And then they'll have to start creating rocket propellant on Mars for that to be possible. They've started feasibility studies on this. Obviously, they haven't tested whether or not they can do it. And they're going to build this colony on Mars at the very lowest elevation on Mars possible. And they believe that they will need thousands of ships to make this happen, So their goal eventually is to have 1 million people on Mars. They think that's about the sustainable colony size to make it independent of Earth. And they will need a few million tons of resources from Earth. And they're hoping to do that in 20 years. And then all types of crazy stuff are possible. They don't really have this is more like the Jetsons, all right? Uh-huh. They don't care about the Mars ecology very much. Yeah. They're okay terraforming Mars. In one interview I saw of Elon Musk, he was like, well, what if we just create nuclear reactions outside Mars orbit to create like a new sun-like structure, So they don't give a darn about Mars, all right? And if you think about this, what's kind of interesting is Elon Musk companies kind of all line up with this idea. There's the Boring Company to dig underground. The easiest way to create space in a new, space station on the moon or on Mars is going to be to basically create a hole in the ground and put a top on it, and then you could have a lot of like basically an underground building.
Jetsons.
That's Jetsons also. Good. Solar cells are going to be very important in all this stuff. The Starlink communications is going to be how we communicate back and forth to Mars. The battery technology that Tesla's working on is going to be very important for all these bases that are using solar energy. And, he hasn't talked about it, but I think nuclear energy in space is probably a no-brainer. But they haven't really. I know that there have been work in the past by NASA on that, but I don't know that they're actually working on it at SpaceX. So, Laura, in 20 years, they're already building the spaceship to build the colony on Mars. They're doing this without asking the Pope or without asking the U.S. Congress. They just decided they're doing it. What are your thoughts?
There's like an idea in nutrition that like some people have. It's like you can like isolate all the like vitamins or something from broccoli, right? And take them in a pill form. And somehow it's not as good for the person as eating broccoli, And I just wonder how much of life on Mars is going to be like that,
Can I add something to that? By the way, we have one rocket engineer who listens to our podcast. At least
one.
Okay. Probably dozens, cool. But I know one does.
Probably dozens. Yeah.
But
thank you.
There's another rocket engineer who I talked to, and he was like, I would rather live on Earth after nuclear war than ever live on Mars.
Yeah, totally. yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's impossible. That just means it won't be enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, and I just like wonder, comparing things to NFP again or whatever. We eat a lot of things that were raised in a kind of artificial environment right now anyway, but there's going to be like a artificiality and a sterility to everything on Mars maybe. I don't know. The way things are grown and food is produced and like the foods that are proper to man are designed to grow on Earth, and like, are we going to ship soil to Mars? I don't know. Like, is everything going to be aquaponic, whatever, and can people live on that forever? I don't know. Anyway, those kind of questions.
There's something about both of these projects that feel like they're just kind of too much. Mm-hmm. Like they're just too ambitious and too much. And it kind of makes me wonder about like the Tower of Babel. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like the modern university has already become a Tower of Babel problem. That like, I think the idea of a university was to like kind of like talk through issues and come up with a worldview. But what the modern university is all these disciplines that train an undergrad almost like with a pair of glasses to see the world as economic or sociological or psychological or a poli-sci problem or whatever, right? And there's almost zero effort.
And even more specific than that sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And very little to no efforts being put into like giving them a whole rounded view. Like even if you said every department of the university is valid and has a function, there's not like this like attempt to harmonize it. And then you get the economist arguing with the poli-sci person, arguing with the sociologist, kind of like they're speaking different languages with different ideas. And they're trying to explain the same phenomena, and they have independent explanations of it, given on their field, right? So it's almost like it already is the Tower of Babel.
You're making a defense for like a classical liberal education.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
because that's just the older university vantage point, So I don't know. I kind of am curious, like, at some point, does this all break down? I have to say that, like, I am attracted to particularly the SpaceX project more than Neuralink. And my attraction to it is, like, there's some faith and there's some hope here. It's very secular. But, like, I don't know. I mean, like, would you rather your kid... Like, here's a question for everyone. Would you rather your kid grow up and be an executive at McDonald's, run a roofing company, or be an engineer at SpaceX, So McDonald's might be a social negative. So is that better than working at SpaceX? A roofing company is positive, but if your kid doesn't do it, some other guy will do roofs, and the world won't be shortening roofs if your kid chooses a different thing. But if he works at SpaceX, he might be integral into helping us become a multiplanetary species. And I don't know why as Catholics we don't think that's a good, I don't know. I don't see any problem with that idea inherently, unless it's just so unnatural, which I think is kind of what you're pointing out. Like it's like the same way you don't want to put hormones in your body to be unnatural. Just being on Mars would be so unnatural, and the things you have to do to yourself would be so unnatural that it would just kind of not be. You wouldn't be getting the human experience.
Yeah, I think that would be another question to think about, like from a Catholic perspective, a theologian to think about.
The other thing I kind of like about what Musk is doing in both these things is he's actually just trying to work on the future. And so much stuff is just either straight up like, hey, let's have another social media platform that can go viral, or just, let's figure out. Like I kind of make fun of things like Uber Eats and Airbnb and stuff like that. It's just like they just figured out a way to more, distribute around something. They're not actually creating. The way and I just think there's something good in that, like actually creating.
And that he doesn't think man is a blight. I agree with that. I also heard Elon Musk. I don't remember if I read this or if I heard him in an interview. It was like somebody was asking like how he got so much stuff done, having like a family and so many kids. And he like explained how he multitasks. It's like if he would go sit with the kids in the playroom or whatever, he was like checking emails and answering. And it's like, good parents know that's not really like spending time with your kids. So I think you're right to point out that there's like a good thing that he believes in humanity, and I think I think we could use more of that. I also think, here's a man that's maybe not deeply connected with humanity, and enjoys actually trolling people, and disconnecting in a way, but you kind of like trolling, so
I kind of admire him as a troll. I kind of think he's like kind of successfully entering the discourse in a way that creates change. He's someone who to me seems like he's obedient to the reality. Like he's like, okay, well, the way to affect discourse is not by long, thoughtful essays with footnotes, but like to get some good one-liners that point the right direction. Or the way to change our future is to get us on Mars, and he thinks of a way to actually achieve this in the current context. And I feel like one of the problems of religious people constantly is we don't really care about the current context. We just almost like our thought structures and our intellectual palaces more than we like worrying about what reality is, we'd rather write a long essay on the moral law than actually do something in the real world that affects morality of people, And I kind of admire him for kind of doing that, but it is troubling. And I do kind of feel like it just seems like the Tower of Babel problem is going to hit here soon. You know, he is kind of a nearly unique historical figure. I don't think a lot of people would like to admit that, but like I keep trying to think of like who is an inventor and a massive industrialist like Musk. You know, I mean, Edison maybe, but he was only like in one, maybe you could say he was in multiple fields with electricity. And Musk even named his car company after Edison's main competitor, Tesla, or rival. You know, so it's just interesting, you know. Wrapping up that part of the podcast, SpaceX has now been figured out. Actually, it's a huge open issue for Catholics to be commenting on. We dare you to get busy on that. Now we need to go to the mailbag. And, you know, we are the most hated podcast of the undead. And we have someone asking for advice on vampires. So Nathan, who I think I might know, has written in, and he's very concerned, it appears, with the Uber Eats style vampire, the one who's just in their crypt all day, binge watching Game of Thrones. And Nathan's asking if feeding them like a nice, delicious, juicy steak and getting them interested in that would be part of the solution as opposed to the Uber Eats I don't know what he's saying. So what are your thoughts, vampire expert Laura?
Is Nathan's idea that if he could get them eating something like delicious and real and natural and that gives you like some virility, like people will wake up out of the fake food, fake world, fake whatever stupor?
I think you're putting it well. But I think that this is all very misled. You know,
okay.
Vampires have a power over people, even if you're not totally their victim. They have like a trance-like power. And I'm worried that Nathan himself has been influenced by vampires in his life.
Like under the influence now.
Right. Like the vampires are like, games. Feed us bloody steak. I mean, bloody steak to a vampire.
Like potato chips?
No, it's like chewing gum. They just take it and they chew it and suck the blood out of it. And so Nathan's tempted to throw bloody steak at vampires. And I really think, Nathan, you're kind of being a tool of the vampires right now. Now, if anyone else here has a question about vampires, Laura and I are very open to receiving that question. But I actually have a new Catholic resource. We have a special researcher on vampires who's Catholic who we're going to be using for this segment in the future. So he has a lot of archival information and lore of vampires that will help us figure this out.
Okay.
He actually gave me a piece for free. He said, you know, if you're being chased by vampires, they're compulsive counters. So you like drop a bunch of rice on the floor and then they have to stop the chase and like count the rice.
Are we allowed to know who this?
No, his identity needs to be kept secret because the undead will go for him.
Oh, okay.
He's not willing to take that risk.
Okay.
But I do wonder if, I do think that this could just be lore. It could be one of those fake things because it sounds a little bit too much like Count
a stake in the
Dracula.
Heart or...
No, I mean, the stake's pretty well established as the way to kill vampires. But like Count Dracula, Count Chocula. I mean, I think that's just a pun. I don't think this. Anyway, with vampires, there's always disinformation and fake news. Sorry. Oh, what's that guy? The Count. Okay, right. So, all right, there's a lot of fake news with vampires. We're here to sort that out for you, figure that out for you, stay Catholic, stay strong, and be against the undead.
Okay.
All right, now we're going to get on to more serious topics. We're going to talk about the place kicker of my favorite football team, the Kansas City Chiefs.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Let me say that the place kicker of the Kansas City Chiefs is already kind of famous in our area for going to the traditional Latin Mass. And we have some other Catholic athletes in the area, mainly Mike Sweeney of the Royals is an old Royal who got daily Mass said.
The owner of the Chiefs is a Catholic.
No, that's not right. a part owner of the Chiefs is a Catholic convert, Lamar Hunt Jr., but the Clark Hunt, same name as myself, is not Catholic. The rest of the Hunt family is not Catholic.
Didn't know that.
Lamar
Okay.
converted. Yep.
Okay.
So, all right. Who did it better? So most of our audience will not remember the great 2006 scandal. The scandal before social media and Twitter were like the thing. Cardinal Arinze went to Georgetown and gave the commencement address, and people walked out. And Georgetown publicly apologized and had to offer counseling to their students so they could get over the commencement address of Cardinal Arinze. So we're going to ask the question, who did it better, the place kicker or the Cardinal? All right. Shall we talk about the Cardinal? Shall I summarize this?
It being traumatizing the hordes, right?
The hordes. One of the hordes actually asked me to cover this topic.
Yeah.
So this is by request. I tried to avoid the Butker talk until yesterday, but just to be able to cover it at some level. So, all right, here's Cardinal Arinze's message. Religion's the only way to true happiness, not the world. Jesus is the way, not all religions, but Jesus is the way. Catholicism gives meaning and purpose to your life. I like that idea. Family is the church of the home, and the family's under siege. And the thing that made everyone lose their mind is when he said the family is mocked by homosexuals. And he also said it's also, under attack by irregular unions and all these other things. So that's Cardinal Arinze's talk. Butker's talk, I would summarize like this if you don't want to listen to it, which I kind of suggest not listening to it. He said that priests, are separate, like kind of a different ecclesiology. They're not someone you relate to, but they're actually someone who should be kind of on a pedestal and separate. That the bishops have largely failed us as leaders, and they're kind of cowardly and worldly, and so are the priests themselves.
The Church of Nice is not cutting it.
Yep. And this was interesting. He talked about going to the traditional Latin Mass, and he said, despite having problems with some of the priests who do traditional Latin Mass, despite thinking the community at the traditional Latin Mass is a little bit strange, he still chooses to go to the traditional Latin Mass. Mm-hmm. And
because he thinks that God is being very particular about how he wants to be worshipped, just like the God of the Old Testament.
Right. I kind of hope he has more arguments than that, but that was what he did say.
That was what he said.
That is what he said, yeah. And then the part that made the world lose its mind was women, that becoming a homemaker and having children is really kind of a great calling for women, if not the highest calling. Yeah,
that his wife would say that her life began when she became wife and mother.
And something to know about Butker, though, is before this, he actually gave the commencement at Georgia Tech last year, and that made the news too. But what he just said was he told the Georgia Tech grads to go start families, and that's where their real satisfaction will come from. And in a way, his Georgia Tech commencement address was kind of aimed at the world, and this Benedictine commencement address was definitely aimed at Catholics. It's kind of weird that the world has been responding to it so much, because almost the whole address is kind of like inside baseball for Catholics.
There's kind of an instinct to want to defend his talk as a Catholic talk given at a Catholic establishment for Catholics, and it's crazy that people outside of that are getting so upset because it is not addressed to them, and I feel that. But then when you kind of get into inside baseball, there's a lot of quibbling about his points and how he made his points. And I think those quibbles, you can argue about them, but there's something maybe meta about it to discuss.
Right. I want to get into that meta thing, but can we just drop a few more details?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
No, you're good. This took the Benedictine establishment by surprise. This was not the message that Benedictine was hoping for right here. I have some evidence of that. And the other thing is the way he delivered it was kind of interesting. I felt like it sounded like a man who was holding hard onto the podium. He knew that this was going to be kind of crazy sounding.
Yeah.
And he kept using this idea of stay in your lane, which made no sense in the way he used it. And it clearly was being used to talk, like at first you're saying like, so weird, like stay in your lane. You're the one not staying in your lane.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But he used it over and over again, and you start realizing actually this is like something he wrote, in this. It basically was a manifesto. That's the way to think about this. And he wrote that in there.
Yeah, I think you were kind of saying the stay in your lane was not supposed to be. It was like a joke or something.
It was a joke that didn't land.
Okay, because I didn't realize it did not occur to me. Like it did not occur to me. I kind of was just watching it, thinking like, "What a moron! You stay in your lane,"
Yeah, and he, so I think that it's just the problem of a person who doesn't do public speaking regularly, who doesn't know how to read a crowd, who doesn't know how to break from the script. So the joke wasn't landing, but he kept sticking with it, stuck with the bit, And the other things that happened that were interesting were the cancel machine got riled up. The local newspapers wanted him fired, wanted him cut from the Chiefs. He's probably the best kicker in football. He's not like one of the worst, And then Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid came out, right? And Patrick Mahomes said, and this is after the media had already said that no one talks to Butker on the team, which is actually something you hear about in football in general, that no one talks to kickers because kickers are very strange people.
Yeah.
And they're strange because every professional athlete has to have this extraordinary psychology to be able to do what they do. And kickers are like the extraordinary of the extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like 50,000 people booing you or cheering you, and you're kicking in front of all of them. And there's probably many people who could make that kick, very few people who could deal with the pressure.
Yeah, and it's your athletic performance is like one, like 10 seconds long or whatever. I don't know. That's not even that really, but yeah.
Whenever a kicker makes a tackle, it's like a big deal because it's like, oh, he is a real football player. But anyway, so no one talks to kickers, and that was being kind of like they're spread around, being like Kelsey and Mahomes hate Butker.
Yeah.
Because Kelsey and Mahomes don't appear to be living the same lifestyle as Butker. Patrick Mahomes said, I've known Butker for 7 years. He's always been a good guy. I based my relationship on that and basically refused to cancel Butker in his press conference. And then Andy Reid was put on the spot about what he was going to do. And Andy Reid's like, well, this was the best line I thought. He was like, I let your reporters in this room and I don't like your opinions either. Yet we still talk.
Yeah.
So they both were for freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And I thought that was one of the kind of cultural takeaways was like the cancel machine churned on Butker obligatorily and nothing happened.
Yeah.
Not even close to anything happening.
Yeah.
It didn't even feel like real pressure. So the cancel machine is so abused at this point that it just doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, Catholics have more issues with what he said than I think the world is concerned about. So what are your thoughts, Laura?
I think the main worldly take is that it's misogynistic or whatever. He said, that God has put him in a place where he has to I don't remember what the word he used, but say, like he has to deliver all these hard truths, and accept his lane and stay in it, and that this is, that God is putting him in this place where he has to say all these hard truths. And to me, that's like ding ding ding, red flag, listen up because something's gonna be weird here. And if you are a person of serious faith, there are going to be moments where you have to do something hard and maybe where you have to deliver a serious message, but anytime that anyone sees themselves as a messenger of hard truths, I'm already the flags are, my flags are raised. And so that, yeah. And I think there's something I don't know. The idea that anyone thinks God has given them the mission to tear down our bishops and our priests, is strange to me. And I think if there's been some saints that God has asked specifically, go correct this specific person, Catherine of Siena, go talk to the Pope, or whatever.
Was Saint Catherine of Siena giving public speeches running down the Pope?
I don't
Not
think
that we know
Catherine of
of.
Siena was giving public speeches, but also
No, but I
there's
think
like
there's a big difference between that. Like
yeah,
going to
but I
someone
also
versus
think
public.
there's a big difference between saying I feel called to correct this particular bishop on this particular issue, and I think I am, getting a word from God about it, or I think I see something that the bishop doesn't, and I feel called to, compared to feeling called to say that all the bishops are cowards and weak. Like those are two very different.
I
don't know. I just the idea that I think when people want to use a platform to run down the church, I'm like not picking up on it. I'm not. I don't.
Well,
yeah.
My main objection is yours also. The way I would express it though is like Cardinal Arinze is a he was like 90 something years old when he gave his talk at Georgetown. I think he's still alive. Whereas like Harrison Butker's like 28. And this is a very guy thing to do when you're 28. But like Cardinal Arinze is the highest level pastor you can be in the Catholic Church without being the Pope, right? So to me, if you ever want to do pastoring and you're a cardinal, all to it. You know what I mean, right? The place kicker of the Chiefs is not a pastor at any level, right? Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have his own opinions, and he shouldn't even express them some. But I think there's this idea that pastoring is actually constitutive of the Catholic Church. It's not like an optional thing. It's part of being Catholic, period, right? And your three main pastors are your priest at your parish is the pastor, your bishop, and your pope. Those are the three main pastors. And to just attack their pastoring publicly, oh boy, it's really, there's very few circumstances that's valid. Doesn't mean you have to love everything they do, but otherwise you're attacking the very concept of being a pastor.
Yeah.
The ability to lead.
Yeah.
Right.
I think another thing that stands out to me is like maybe when I was like a young adult, a young adult, like embracing Catholicism, there was like, it was kind of at a time of like a shift in the church where, kind of JP2 generation saying like, hey, like some of the church teaching, the church teaching is beautiful, and I do want to adopt like the church moral teaching, and maybe that wasn't a thing that had been emphasized in the Catholic Church for some time, and I do, and so I think the Catholic vibe maybe was from in a place of like maybe some of the church moral teaching had been disregarded for a while, and people were kind of discovering some joy in actually trying to live it, and I think there's a different vibe now, and I think if I was a young person now, I would have like some temptations that I did not have back then, and I would want to say to a young person, like, be wary of anybody that's trying to add rules to the church teaching, and like we've got lots of them, but I think he took a dig at NFP. That was a thing that I think maybe the wider media would have missed, or not understood what that line was.
I think the stay in your lane thing is actually one of my main points too, not just from a pastoring perspective, but like I have a lot of weird opinions, and I think this podcast is an okay forum for them. But like when I get invited to talk, and I get invited to talk at Benedictine, like to different sociology classes and things like this, right? And when I'm invited to talk, I have to be conscious of like, why am I invited? I'm invited because I have some ideas of mission work they might be interested in, or ideas of poverty and poverty in America they might be interested in. They're not inviting me to talk about Joe Biden, and it's kind of irresponsible if I do. Mm-hmm. Like if I want to do that, I should just
Butker
ask
did.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should just say, hey,
yeah.
What I really want to talk to you this class about is Joe Biden and Trump,
mm-hmm.
And if they say, yeah, great, go. then great. But like at a commencement address, at Benedictine, there's like 20% of Benedictines not even Catholic. They're almost all athletes, by the way.
Yeah.
But, you're kind of taking a special day for them and making a little circus out of it on your points, So having said that, what should he have talked about, right? And I think what would have been really valid is, life advice is important at, a commencement address. Even if you're a 28-year-old kicker, you could still give something along those lines.
If you're a professional athlete, you have some wisdom just based on the fact that you have been very disciplined and worked hard at something,
Sure. Right.
At
Anything
the minimum.
about
And if there's a way, that your faith motivated you or aided you in doing that, it's interesting. Staying Catholic in like a professional football locker room, very interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think also like everyone is an expert on their own kind of spiritual life.
Yeah.
If you wanted to talk about like how you came to the faith or how you took it more seriously and the role traditional Latin Mass played in that, I think that'd be valid. I just don't think, let me, in a sense, pontificate, much more broadly than anything I am known that they would have invited me for my expertise for. That's an abuse of the podium in a sense.
Yeah.
And he should go on podcasts and do this, not go.
Yeah.
Even then I'd be hesitant for Catholics to ever throw the pastors under the bus. You should like say, hey, in general, I think this is how it should have been handled in hindsight or even in foresight. This is what should have happened. I don't like the way it was handled.
Yeah. I think there's also a broader question, which is about masculinity in our current culture. And I mean, I think people have been talking about masculinity being under attack for some years now, but like, and I think that secular people see that and like Christian people see that, and there can be like a temptation to replace a bad cultural ideology that is tearing down men with another bad ideology, maybe that celebrates men more. So I think, I'm not trying to say Butker's worldview is totally bad, but I think that a lot of the reactions I saw to his speech were in the context of this is kind of just saying some of the really weird things that are being said online about by other Catholic men that are Butker's wife can be a stay-at-home mom forever and ever because he's a professional football player, and she might have help being but I think I've talked to women who are maybe trying to date in the Catholic world, and they're kind of meeting guys that are like, you must be a stay-at-home mom, and it's like, must I be? And it's just a weird thing to bring to a first date.
I don't know. I disagree, kind of. I mean, probably you shouldn't be having a first date if you aren't on real. Well,
but I think the reason it's important, it's like if you have like if you have a guy with a very particular theology degree who wants to get married and doesn't have like a tenure track position lined up saying like, I will marry a woman who will only be a stay-at-home mom. It's like,
well, then you're also saying I will marry a woman who wants a vow of poverty.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is just what it is. I know people who chose that, and I don't.
That's fine, but I don't. Right? I have been very edified by friends that have chosen that, and I think it's but I think there is a delusion.
I am against
that some
what you're
people
saying,
might have
Laura,
against it
without being against what you're saying. So
yeah.
I like working moms. My own wife has worked. I think this is great. I don't really.
Yeah.
I think I also think the common idea of a stay-at-home mom is weird historically, but it kind of deserves its own segment. Like, I think the stay-at-home mom of the 19th century was doing real economic activity in the
working.
home.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And now the stay-at-home mom is just homemaking and taking care of kids and doing education and things, which is very cool, but it's not the true tradition. The tradition was you were making clothes and killing yourself in an acre big garden and doing all this other stuff, But like, sorry, all that requires too much explanation, I also think you could also argue that like all this stuff we say is anti-man isn't really anti-man. It's like evil man. Like the feminist movement, you can easily claim is like a, ploy by men to have easier sex and not work as hard and support the family. Or you could say the trans movement is so that dudes can be women and invade women's spaces. There's just weird stuff there to like unpack. And this idea that people say, hey, well, how about this traditional model? And I'm for this and I'd like to start our whole dating relationship on this. I don't know. That sounds good. As good as any of these other ideas. I don't feel ready to fully like go after this,
I want to say something about Cardinal Arinze's speech.
Right.
There was one sentence that caused the issues, and it's malreception. Is that a word? It's poor reception. And I read that sentence, and I was like, ooh, I wouldn't have said it that way. The speech was very beautiful and hopeful otherwise, though. And I just love the idea of, like, serious religion leads to happiness and joy and lasting things. And I appreciated that overall about the speech.
I am more and more troubled that the only real way to communicate is with a certain abruptness. Mm-hmm. And like when Pope Francis did the 60 Minutes interview and he was asked if a girl born today could become a deacon or a priest in their lifetime, and he just goes, no.
No.
Now,
like a gangster.
Like a gangster, right? But it also was like real communication.
Yeah.
And there's a way of talking about that where you try to allay everyone's concerns, but you also say the truth and you try to say it with nuance and all that. And in a way, I feel like that just has not borne fruit, right? And like Cardinal Arinze's one like most challenging sentence that caused everyone to go to counseling, it communicated. And if you say it very nuancedly, I'm worried you just don't communicate at all. And then it's like a mess, And I think because I usually think that's charitable. Say it with nuance, say it as easy as you can so that it's charitable. But if you're not communicating, it's not charitable.
Yeah. I feel like I think it's we need to communicate simply and clearly, and nuance can muddy the water sometimes. I think I would have tried to say it differently. Right. But Pope Benedict had nothing that would ever be, like I don't think he was like frequently. Everything, when he wrote something or said something, it was clear and true. And I don't think he spoke in half truths, or.
Right. Well, neither did Pope Francis when he said no.
No, right. But I think I think not speaking in half-truths for the sake of effect, like even if you think the half-truth will have more of effect than the full truth, I think that's probably wrong. I do think sometimes you kind of poke a bear in order to get him to listen, and then you have the more thoughtful conversation. Yeah.
But anyway, God bless. All right. So I like Cardinal Arinze's way of doing controversial commencement speeches. I think that's the right way, partly just because he is a cardinal and it's much more his realm.
Yeah.
It is his lane. So
yeah. It wasn't a big departure or addition to Catholic teaching.
Right. Yeah. And Butker's invited on the podcast to defend himself. So, all right. God bless.
Thank you,
Let's
Clark.
do the Simpleton Podcast. Sorry for anything painful we do on this podcast. Talk to you later. Send in any questions you have, if you need expert vampire advice.
Yes. All right.
Peace out.
See you later, Clark.
All right, bye-bye.